Hi, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. I'm Dr. Marie McNeely, and I appreciate you joining me today for episode 775, featuring our guest, Dr. Carly Ann York. If you like this episode and you want to check out more stories from amazing people doing great science today, you can find more episodes of our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you like to listen. Today, Carly has some excellent stories to share with all of us. So get ready to meet another one of our brilliant people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Carly Ann York. So, Carly, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, Carly, we're excited to learn more about you and your work, but first, let me take a moment to tell our listeners a little bit more about your current position and how you got there. So, listeners, Carly is an associate professor in the biology department at Lenoir-Rhyne University. There she is also the founder and faculty advisor of the student organization SEEDS, which is focused on promoting diversity and accessibility in the life sciences. Carly received her bachelor's degree in exercise physiology from Elon University, her master's in ecological sciences from Western Kentucky University, and her Ph.D. in ecological sciences from Old Dominion University. Afterwards, Carly was a postdoctoral teaching fellow at Virginia Wesleyan College before joining the faculty at Lenoir-Rhyne. Today, Carly, we're excited to get to know you as a scientist, of course, but also get to know you more generally as a person. So can you start by telling us, what do you like to do when you're not doing science?
When I am not in the lab, I am on my farm. My husband and I have a little animal sanctuary that we run together, where we have donkeys and horse, a ton of cats. Right now, a single chicken, which is kind of weird. But we just collect misfit critters, and we're trying to grow as much food as we can on our property and be good little sustainable people, which all ties back into what I actually do as an animal physiologist and a biologist, but it's at a different scene.
I love that. So is it difficult to balance? It sounds like running a farm in and of itself is a full-time job. How do you balance this with your academic responsibilities?
It can definitely be tough. It depends on what's going on, honestly, on the farm. If everything is running smoothly, it's not a problem. I'll wake up in the morning, I'll go check on everyone, do a morning feed, try to get into my office by 7 and then back home by 5. And then I come right out to check on them and feed and water, and then it's bedtime.
Well, it sounds like quite a bit to keep you busy then. I love to hear that you've got this farm. And you mentioned that you sort of care for animals. You are growing food as well. What do you like to grow there?
We have a vegetable garden. We have a little orchard. We got peaches for the first time this year. We put in baby peach trees when we moved and got like a basket full of peaches, blueberries and raspberries and strawberries, squash and zucchini and radishes, cucumbers. My cucumbers aren't looking great this year, though, which is a bummer because I really like making pickles.
Well, it sounds like you've got quite a variety of different things growing in the farm there. I think that's awesome. And I think it's nice to have this outdoor place that you can retreat to after a busy day in the office. But I'd love to talk about your scientific side next. So, Carly, you mentioned that there's some tie-ins with your hobbies as well. But how do you describe what you do to someone who is outside of science or perhaps outside of biology?
So I am an animal physiologist, which means I study how animals' bodies have evolved to incorporate their environment, to help them to thrive and survive in whatever environment they're living in. And specifically, I've been largely focused on sensory biology. So what do different animals see? What do they hear? What can they smell? How do they actually experience their world?
I think that's so cool. And I'm excited to chat more in detail about some of the animals that you study and some of the work that you do. But perhaps we'll take a moment to talk about motivation. You mentioned you've got what sounds to me like a bit of a grueling schedule, in the office by 7 every day, out the door by 5, doing work on the farm, kind of on both ends. So what keeps you motivated, Carly? I think this is important to learn about scientists because it's a tough job. So do you have a favorite quote or a saying or something that just keeps you going every day?
My favorite quote is to be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. And I think that's by Wendell Berry. That is part of the motivation in maintaining a positive attitude. And that gives me the energy to at least wake up every day and do the things that need doing.
I love my job. I love that I get to study animals, and I love that I get to talk about animals all day long. And then I love what I do at home. Like, to me, it's not a chore to have to go down and feed my donkeys and pet my mini donkey and have my cats rub up against my legs. It's all, to me, joyful. So yeah, I just genuinely love what I do.
I think that's wonderful. And I think finding joy in these sort of everyday tasks can be really fulfilling and make it really rewarding to go through what can sometimes be a bit of a trudge between successes in science. So let's talk about maybe some of the people who helped you along this scientific journey. So Carly, when you look back at your career in your life, are there particular people who really come to the top of your mind who served as role models or mentors for you?
Well, my mom certainly played a very big role in getting me involved in science and in my love for animals in particular. I definitely inherited that from her. But I grew up on Capitol Hill in D.C., so had access to the Natural History Museum, the Smithsonian National Zoo, and I was a regular visitor. I attended zoo camps every summer. My mom enrolled me in zoo camps every summer. So she had a clear trajectory that she was trying to put me on, and it worked. Definitely worked. And then in terms of other folks, I've had to look a little bit outward of my own circle, I think, for some motivation, because I have mostly been surrounded by men. All of my PIs along the way have been men, and they can certainly be motivating. They were wonderful people, but it's sometimes really helpful to see someone who looks like you and, is balancing some of the same things you are. So my science hero is Sheila Paddock, who is a researcher at Duke University. She studies the biomechanics of ultra-fast animal movements. And I think she is just incredible. She's done TED Talks and a bajillion podcasts. And she's just a lovely, lovely human to talk to. So I've recently gotten to do a few interviews with her for an upcoming book that I am working on. So
oh, that's really exciting. And was this someone who you met before you started looking up to her, or were you sort of idolizing her and then finally got this chance to interview her?
I would say I was idolizing her first. I idolized her. And then when I got my position at Lenoir-Rhyne, we bring in speakers pretty regularly. And I was like, ooh, I know who I want to bring. So invited her to come, and she spent 2 days here, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful human. Like, within a few hours, we're talking about our marriages and things like that.
Aww.
And since then, I've seen her multiple times at conferences and whatnot, and in these interviews. So she's become someone who is a little bit within reach, I'd like to think.
Absolutely. And I think that's something I found too, a lot of these scientists that I'm almost intimidated by, or like really impressed by at the very least. Once you sit down and talk to them, you sort of discover that they're normal people and very, very down to earth.
Yeah.
It's surprising and wonderful all at the same time.
Yes.
So let's talk about your scientific journey in a little bit more detail. You mentioned that your mother had a big impact on you. You were able to visit these wonderful museums, the zoo there in DC. So what really got you thinking about science and research and education specifically?
It didn't come in one big moment. So my undergraduate was in exercise physiology. And the reason that I did that is because I was riding horses competitively at the time. Throughout college and grad school, I rode competitively. And I wanted to apply the exercise physiology principles to horses. And I didn't know that there was such a thing as animal physiology at the time. So I got through probably my junior year and then was like, oh man, I really should have been a biology major. But at that point, it's too late. So I went ahead and I graduated. And then after that, I spent a year volunteering at the North Carolina Zoo in their wildlife rehab center, just getting experience and taking the few biology classes that I needed in addition to my degree to start applying for graduate school. So that was one of the steps there. And I'll say my husband has always been incredibly encouraging too. Sometimes I think in the past I would have called it pushy, but now I can call it encouraging that I'm here. But he always felt I was capable of more than what I was, and I'm really thankful for that. So he was the one who said, you need to go to grad school. And so I got my master's, and within a month of being there at grad school, I was like, I'm getting my PhD. I'm doing this. This is where I belong. And for all of that, my goal was never teaching per se. I was studying animal physiology because I loved animals and people were just there. But then it turns out that the academic pipeline is for PhD into a position as a professor at a university often. And I decided that I wanted to focus more on the teaching, mostly because the funding scene is so abysmal that I knew I wanted to have this farm, and I didn't think I could be an R1 researcher and do this too. So I chose to apply to liberal arts colleges where teaching is the primary focus. And it turns out I love it. I genuinely love teaching. I never would have imagined that. I'm a naturally very shy human, but it's actually really fun to talk about things they're excited about all day long.
Definitely. And I'm so glad you shared your story, because I think for a lot of people who are considering careers in science, the idea of it sounds really exciting. They sort of get involved in undergraduate or maybe in graduate school, starting to do research, and then they realize what the path actually looks like. And they think this R1 top tier research institution is the only choice. But I think that's not the case. And people can have wonderful careers at these, like you said, small liberal arts schools where you're doing teaching, a little bit of research, and you get maybe a little bit more balance that you would at a research institute where you would be just writing grants all the time.
Yes. And I have done a lot of work in science communication in the past few years, and my college has been really, really supportive of that in a way that I'm not sure a research institution would be. I've published 2 children's books, and I am wrapping up my first adult book, and they here think that's great and consider it scholarship, whereas not everyone would do so at these bigger schools.
Certainly. I think finding a place that supports all of these different areas of your career that you want to develop is really important. And I would love to chat about your science communication work. I think this is tremendously important. So how did you get interested in science communication?
This was something it kind of happened to me. In January of 2020, I had a friend convince me to get on Twitter for the first time, and I was very much not into it, but thought, what the heck, I'll just get on. Sure, I'll make an account, and started to get involved in what was then known as science Twitter. And of course, within a few months, we were in lockdown, and having that online community became a huge part of my life. And I started being asked to do a lot of talks at museums and podcasts and things like that. And I just sort of got going, and people kept asking me to try something, and I would. I made an agreement with myself that I would try everything I'm asked at least once and figure out what really fits and what doesn't. And I think I'm only just now getting to the point where I can say some things fit better than others. I did have one gig with the Science Channel where I was being interviewed for one of their shows called What on Earth? And it was such a weird experience. I was very uncomfortable. I am not particularly comfortable with having a camera in my face and being told to say lines. I'm not an actor. And from that, I felt so uncomfortable that I wanted to get better at it. So I started a TikTok channel and was making myself sit in front of a video camera and say things. And I did that for maybe a year or 2 years, and it was fun. I had a lot of really, really positive feedback, but I just kind of hated it. I gave it a chance, and I just don't like it. So I have given myself permission to let that go. And instead, I think writing is where my science communication is going to be focused.
Oh, I think that's so cool. And I love that you took this approach of just sort of following the opportunities as they came up and trying different things, kind of keeping an open mind, building these communities wherever you ended up. And I think that is a fantastic approach and a great way to get a better sense of what you really do like to do.
Yeah, I didn't see this coming. I never would have seen myself writing books. It all just happily has happened. So yeah, I feel like I'm just riding a wave and I don't know what's next, but I'll write it.
Definitely. Well, I know you've got a lot of really cool things going on between, like you mentioned, the books that you're working on, also some of the research that you're doing there at LR, and then also just the teaching. So you've got a lot of different aspects that you're balancing. But what is something that you're working on right now, Carly, that you are just the most excited about?
Well, I am finishing up this first adult nonfiction book. And it is on the value of silly seeming science. So the kinds of research projects that get funded by the NSF and maybe certain political parties roll their eyes at so-and-so getting $1 million to study something as silly as, say, punching shrimp or duck penises, things like that. So the book talks about why it actually is so important that we take this kind of research seriously, that even if it's silly seeming, we can gain an incredible amount of knowledge, and we don't know where that's going to take us next.
Absolutely. And I know your research has spanned a variety of different animals and systems. So can you talk about just some of the projects that you've worked on, and maybe if you have one ongoing right now?
My research currently is around the African clawed frogs. So these are funky frogs from Africa, obviously. They're fully aquatic, and they literally do have claws on them. They have little claws on their hind legs. And they are invasive species all over the world. They were actually the original pregnancy tests, like the first widely available pregnancy tests. And that means they were stocked heavily in labs and hospitals, and then a lot of them were released. And they're really, really good at being invasives. They can live for like 20 years and they're super hardy. There's some evidence that they might be the cause of this nasty fungus that's really wiping out amphibians, the chytrid fungus. They're actually immune to it. So that is perhaps they introduced it. But I am studying their sensory systems. So I am trying to evaluate how they interact with their world, really, how they catch their prey, how they respond to a predator. They have twerpy little eyes. I don't think they work very well. And they have these hair cells down their body that like fish have, squid have, but most frogs lose it. So I'm spending a lot of time looking at that. And with all this is with undergraduate students. So teaching them how to science. Well, we're doing it.
I think that's wonderful. And I think for me, I went to a small liberal arts college and had these initial experiences working on undergraduate research. And I think they really shaped my interests and kind of helped me realize what I like to do, what I didn't like to do, and realize that research was something that I could do, and when I was starting my career. So I think these opportunities are really exciting. What has it been like for you working with undergrads in the lab?
It's been fun. I really enjoy getting them started and seeing them thrive. And the hardest part is, in science, we flop on our faces all the time. It's just part of it. And they never believe it's going to happen to them. And try to warn them, and then they flop, and then they're really upset about it. And after that moment, that's the moment you can tell whether or not this is going to be something they're going to do with their lives. If they're like, okay, I'm getting up, I'm going to figure this out, then you have a researcher there. And the ones who stay down, maybe not so much. But I've had a lot of really incredible students. I have one who's finishing up her Ph.D. at Vanderbilt right now. Vet school. We have a bunch of PhDs and master students. So it's really exciting to see that the foundation you gave these students carries them onward and upward successfully.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up some of the face flops, we'll call them, the challenges, the struggles, the failures. I think these are so common in science, but many people don't realize that, particularly when they're just starting, because you have this perception that scientists kind of have a lot of the answers and know exactly what they're doing. And a lot of science is figuring it out. So can you tell us about a time that you, Carly, particularly struggled with something, or maybe you had a major failure, and walk us through how you got through that tough time?
The story that comes to mind is I was working on my PhD and I was studying squid sensory biology. So squid have these hair cells along their body, just like the frogs do. and I was studying how they use that system to respond to predators. Working with squid is really tricky. We would go up to the eastern shore, like an hour and a half drive. We'd trawl for a few hours, catch as much as we could, drive back, set them up in the lab. But then they tend to drop off pretty quickly after that. So every moment with the squid is precious. So I was trying to do these predator trials. And when you're doing animal behavior research, you largely depend on the animal doing the behavior that you want them to do. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. And in this case, I actually needed two animals to do what I wanted them to do. So I needed a fish to chase the squid and the squid to escape from the fish. So I decided to use flounder. I read a few papers, and apparently flounder really like squid. They don't look like ferocious predators, but they actually really are. They have some gnarly teeth, and I actually had one jump out of the tank and bite me and drew blood.
Oh my goodness.
So they're pretty vicious. But I had this one little flounder. His name was Chomsky. And when I just started doing this, he reliably, every time I put a squid in there, he would just chase it. And it was just perfect data collection. And I was so relieved that I was able to collect this data. And one morning I came in to check on the lab, and Chomsky had jumped out of his tank in the middle of the night, and his little dried body was just on the floor. And I had a strong emotional reaction over my little fish. I picked up his body and ran to a public bathroom and sobbed, which is the kind of unhinged thing that you do in graduate school. It was tears for my fish, but also he was my perfect data fish, and I didn't actually know if another fish would do what he did. So There was a lot riding on that. Turns out other fish do that too, and it was all fine. But yeah, these are the moments where you're just not sure. And then there's just, if your animals are behaving, then your technology probably isn't going to work at the same time, or vice versa. It's always juggling a bajillion things.
So then how did you recover after that sort of devastating loss of Chomsky, the fish that you were counting on for your data? What kept you from throwing in the towel and saying, I'm walking away from this?
I was too far in at that point in time to give it up. And I mean, I don't think I was even honestly tempted to fully quit. I just had to have a little fit for a moment. Like I just had to sit on the floor and feel my feelings and then get up off the floor and carry on, just like I hope my students will do. And I got other fish. There was Pancake and there was Incognito, and they were great little fish too. We carried on.
Plenty of fish in the sea, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Carly, thank you for sharing this story of a tough time. And I think it really captures that in graduate school, like you said, when you're still fresh in your research career, you do encounter a lot of unanticipated challenges and struggles. And I think it is important to show listeners that you can pick yourself up and keep going after these challenges. And you will have many successes along the way as well. So, Carly, we'd love to take a moment to acknowledge some of these successes because I think it's so important to celebrate these wins, whether they're big or small. So do you have a favorite success story you'd like to share with us?
Honestly, right now, I kind of feel like my books are my biggest success, although I just had a thought. There was one part of my doctoral research that I was doing as part of my PI's NSF grant, and it was the biomechanics of squid locomotion. And we were using a very fancy system, digital defocusing particle velocimetry. I think I skipped a letter in there. And there's only a few of these machines in the world, and it images the wake flows around animals in 3 dimensions. So before I started my squid work, I had not done a ton in physics and mathematics, which is the basis of biomechanics. So this part of my research was really out of my comfort zone. And I got that paper published, I think, 4 years after I graduated from my PhD. I was determined because to me, it wasn't finished until it was published. So 4 years afterwards, it came out in 2020. And now I feel like I can say that I'm a biomechanist, at least a little bit.
At least on paper, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think this publishing a paper can be a really long and drawn out process. But Carly, how did you celebrate this success 4 years after your graduation when this paper finally was published?
It was the fall of 2020. So everything was hard.
Life was different.
Yeah. And I don't even know that there was a celebratory moment other than me saying, okay, I can move on. Yeah. And next.
Yeah, I think definitely the pandemic disrupted some of the normal lab functions, celebrations, things like that, but also gave people some time to catch up, I think, on writing papers and things like that. So there was at least perhaps a little bit of a silver lining.
Yeah, we were actually teaching in hybrid mode. So it was probably the worst of the possible options, where we had to make our classes into half online classes, half in-person classes, but the in-person classes were divided into two for personal distancing. So then we were literally teaching double the amount of classes that we were before. It was such a nightmare.
It sounds like a struggle. Hopefully things have reverted a little bit back more to normal. And I know when you're working in the classroom, when you're working in the lab, working with students, it can be really motivating and encourage you to dig in even deeper and do more work. But we try to encourage all of our listeners out there to take a break, to give their minds a break, and to read broadly. I think this is a great way to give your mind a break and also just expand your horizons. So Carly, do you have a favorite book that you'd like to recommend for us, or just one that you've read recently and enjoyed, whether it's about science or not?
My favorite science book that I've read recently is Ed Young's newest release, An Immense World. It is about animal sensory physiology. First, I was like a little bit mad because I wanted to write that book, but I couldn't have done it nearly as well as Ed did. It's an incredible, incredible book, and he's a beautiful writer. And I had the privilege of meeting him in the spring, and he's a wonderful person, too. I'm currently reading Mary Roach's book, Fuzz, because she is coming to our university in the fall. So I look forward to meeting her as well. I have a friend who highly recommended that I start reading the Red Mars series by King Stanley Robinson. And so I have started doing that. That's my fun read right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. We will add these recommendations to our website for our listeners to find there if they're looking for something to pick up. And I think as scientists, one of the things that you don't really appreciate about the career is some of the travel opportunities that you'll get. I think this is one of the things that's absolutely wonderful, getting to work with, talk to, and see scientists from all over the world at conferences or just other opportunities. So do you have a favorite place, Carly, that your science has taken you?
Yes. Last February, I went on a winter survival camping trip in Wisconsin with some fellow scientists and science communicators. And it was very snowy and very cold. And the goal was to basically brainstorm and meet people who are involved in the same fields as you are, but also to learn these skills that you then hope to incorporate into your science communication one way or another. So this was really outside of my comfort zone. I wore snowshoes for the first time. I think I slipped and fell on my butt within like 5 minutes of being there.
Oh, gosh.
But it was a really, really cool experience.
Well, anything I think that's titled a survival trip is going to be intense. Who thought of this idea?
I will say that we had options as far as how hardcore we could go. There's the option to sleep in tents with little wood stoves. There was the option to sleep in yurts that we built, which were just giant snow tunnels. And then there was the option to sleep in a cabin with a heated floor. And I chose the latter.
I can't blame you for that. Well, this sounds like an amazing experience. So what were some of your maybe key takeaways, or what did you learn, if you have an example of something that you think really impacted your science communication or your science?
The most memorable fact I remember is that Doritos are really flammable.
Really?
I don't know. Maybe that'll come in handy.
Good to know if we're in a survival situation.
Yeah. But honestly, it was mostly the best part of that was meeting other science communicators from all around the country and being able to collaborate with some of them in the future. Connections are good.
Oh, absolutely. And I think when you get to meet scientists, that's something that strikes me, or at least struck me when I first started in the field of science, was that they don't really meet the stereotypes that I think a lot of people have, because in the media, scientists are all portrayed in their little white lab coats, working in the lab all the time, but there are so many different, funny, quirky, creative, amazing people in science. And unfortunately, that's not the reputation that we have. So if you think back, Carly, to all the different labs that you've worked in, or just the quirky traditions and memories and experiences that you've had with others in science, do you have an example of a funny story or a tradition or something you can share that really shows this human side of science that people don't often get to see?
I feel like I'm a human doing science all the time. So picking a particular moment is hard. At least I try to pretend to be a human.
Right.
So I went from studying horses in my master's degree, to studying squid, which was a super weird choice. I get really seasick and I don't actually like water that much. I'm not an ocean gal, but I don't even know why I was like, I am doing this, but I did. And it was fantastic. But the first time that I went out on a boat with my PI and his wife, his family, another grad student, this was actually before we were even collecting data. We were just going out on Virginia Beach when the Virginia Aquarium boat, and we ended up getting a call that there was a sea turtle that was stuck up in some netting, and they asked us to go out and check it out. And the water was very rough. And I should have known. I should have taken the Dramamine, should have been prepared. But that was my first experience with my PI. I threw up all over the place. I threw up until my nose bled. And this is the story that he told the day that I defended my dissertation. This is how he introduced me. So
you've come a long way since then.
Yes.
Well, I think this is a great example that scientists are not infallible, right? I think you don't always know your limitations.
No. And also doing science isn't always comfortable, physically or emotionally.
And I think, like you said, there's a lot of pieces of it that people don't necessarily think about if they only see sort of that lab portrayed. Like you have to actually go out and collect specimens that you will be studying and things like that. These other steps that come before the clean, pristine laboratory environment.
Exactly.
Well, Carly, I think you're doing some exciting research. And I think in science, there are often limitations, unfortunately, whether it's funding, staff, technology, feasibility, or just time in the day. So if we took away the barriers that normally hold you back, is there one particular research question that you would want to answer most?
You know, I've been really interested in nudibranchs lately, the sea slugs.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so freaking wild. They all look like little clowns in different ways. I would love to do some research on their sensory biology and like visual perception, because their visual displays are just nuts. So that would be so cool. But I have none of the things to go that direction right now.
Listeners, if there's anyone out there who's looking for a collaborator who studies these sea slugs,
I'm in.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what is it about these sea slugs that has captivated you?
Oh, they're just beautiful. If you go to Google image and type in sea slug or nudibranch, you will come up with just a visual masterpiece of biology. There are orange ones, and pink ones, and polka dotted and striped, and some have big frilly gills, and they just have so much going on visually that I'd love to know how they actually perceive each other. Like, is that coloring for predators? Is that coloring for each other? Is it for both? I don't know.
So many questions. Yeah. Well, this sounds wonderful. And I appreciate you giving us something to think about during our day, me and our listeners here. And we talked about some different aspects of your career. I would love to end our conversation by talking about advice for listeners out there who might be on their own scientific journey or a journey otherwise. What is the best advice that you could give them? Maybe something that really helped you along your own journey, Carly?
Just knowing that failure is part of the scientific process. And it really just needs an entire different word in the context of science, because even a failure means you're learning something. You learn some information with that, even if it wasn't the direction that you thought you were going to go. And that's going to inform the choices you make next. And it's just that scientific method is not linear. We teach it. It's this straight line of hypothesis and experiment. And then we have methods. And it's really just like a twisty-turny journey of information to get where you are going. And I think it's important to also be really open to going in directions that you didn't originally expect to go in.
Well, I love that advice. And I think your career is a good example of it. Just like you said, following those opportunities, seeing what comes next, and making those decisions along the way of what is most interesting or exciting or the best fit for you as you go. So wonderful message to share with listeners. Carly, is there any other last message or last note of inspiration that you would like to leave everybody with here today?
I'm going to put in a little shameless plug and say that my latest children's book actually just came out. It's called Queens of the Jungle, and it's a nonfiction science book about all of the amazing things that females in the animal kingdom do. And I haven't counted, but there's got to be at least 100 different animals all doing something incredibly cool, with the females just being awesome and ruling. So if you have any kiddos out there who might need a little encouragement of any kind into the scientific realm, I would love for you to pick it up.
Fantastic recommendation. We'll add this to our book list as well online for listeners who might have kids who are interested in getting into science or learning more about the animal world. And Carly, if our listeners want to learn more about you and what you do, what is the best way for them to do so?
They can follow me on my social media pages. I historically have been most active on Twitter, or X, if we have to call it that. And my name is Biology Carly on there. I am also on Instagram and TikTok as well under Biology Carly. So you can check me out at any of those places.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely get connected with Carly. Take a moment to learn more about her and her work. And Carly, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been wonderful to chat with you, and listeners, always wonderful to have you here with us as well. We hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of People Behind the Science.